This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in this week's NC Spin. The calendar says we're officially in the Christmas season, but instead of goodwill, eggnog, and happy feelings, some are saying bah humbug and protesting. This week we tell you who they are and what they're protesting. Plus we have bad news and good news regarding the coronavirus, and we ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of the panel, this week they include Donna Martinez from WPTF Radio and the John Locke Foundation, Leo Daughtry, former legislator and member of the UNC Board of Governors, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, and Chris Fitzsimon, director of the state's Newsroom. We'll begin our uninterrupted discussion after these brief messages from our underwriter.
Farmville, steeped in Eastern Carolina tradition, yet surprisingly sophisticated. In Farmville, find a French bakery, a furniture school, glass blowing, great shops, and restaurants. East of I-95, in the middle of everything, find it first in Farmville.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
The big issue in 2020 is healthcare. Let's talk basics. You are the key to your own personal health, but there is strong evidence that if you have a relationship with a family physician, your quality of life will be better. You'll likely live longer, and you'll have 33% lower healthcare costs. Your family doctor knows you, has your medical history, and can quickly diagnose health problems. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Let's begin the spin. While most of us would love to put aside the rancor of the elections and the pain from the virus in favor of celebrating a season of joy and goodwill, there's strong evidence we've moved into a season of protest. While all our statewide elections have been basically determined, we entered the week with the contest for Chief Justice of the Supreme Court still being protest. John Hood, the race ended with the final recount on Wednesday or Thursday. Justice Paul Newby still had a 401 vote lead from among the 5.5 million votes cast. Current Chief Justice Sherry Beasley has requested a hand-to-eye recount. Where are things standing and where is it going?
The way that new recount that Justice Beasley has requested works is that they do a sampling of precincts across the state, and if there is a large enough difference between the hand recount and the previous number that if you extrapolated it, it might change the result of the election, then the full hand recount proceeds. May happen. It seems unlikely given what we've already seen. There have been lots of pressure on Beasley to stop the continuing attempts to change the outcome. Some of those folks I notice haven't been as critical of the president, so I think you should be consistent about this. But it is true; it is very difficult for people who are in office and then there's an election and they appear to lose by perhaps a narrow margin. It is sometimes difficult for them to let go the possibility that maybe a recount or another look, or in this case, as you were alluding, protest to how the ballots were counted, that might change the outcome. It usually doesn't. But it is difficult sometimes for people to give up the hope.
You got to know that it hurts. I mean, particularly with only 400 votes. I mean, if you lose by 10,000 is one thing, but 400 is a different matter altogether. Republican members of the Council of State are protesting over Governor Cooper's handling of the Council of State meetings, and they think they should be allowed to be more involved in the decisions that are being made by Governor Cooper. But this is a very partisan group. Chris, is there any chance whatsoever if Cooper did try to involve them, it would end up any way except a Republican-Democrat split?
Well, it's a little hard to imagine given some of the rhetoric that we've seen, and we have seen Council of State members join in some of the protests and complain about Governor Cooper's handling of the virus. I think what you might see is legislation this year that makes it even clearer. I think there are a lot of people that are clamoring for more input. But I think there is a disappointing lack of recognition, I think, among some of the members of the Council of State about actually what we're facing and, frankly, how North Carolina has done better than almost all of its neighboring states in keeping people alive during this terrible time.
Leo, you served in the legislature for quite a while. The legislature is protesting too. They don't like the changes that the State Board of Elections made so far as election rules were concerned, owing to the virus, owing to the delay in the mail system. And so they are now suggesting they want to pass laws, maybe even set up an oversight commission for the Oversight Board of Elections. What do you think of that?
Well, I thought we had a very good election in our state. I think that those people who didn't win, and I can tell you, I've run, and it is very personal, and I can understand how the Chief Justice has some hard feelings at the present time with only 400 or 500 votes separating them. But I think our board, I think what the big problem is with the General Assembly is it took so long to count the votes. Other states had finished much, much earlier than we had in counting the votes. And I do think there ought to be some effort to say that once the election is over, within a very reasonable time, we'll have the results.
But Donna, doesn't this really come down to the fact that the way the law is set up, the governor is allowed to appoint the majority of the members of the State Board of Elections. And so there's 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And the legislature hadn't been happy about that, tried to change it at one point in time. The courts overruled them.
Well, yes, and that's why elections do have consequences. I would predict that we're going to have a very, very interesting Council of State meetings coming up in 2021. And the reason is that this week I had the opportunity to host a forum at the John Locke Foundation with 3 of the new statewide elected officials. One of them, our Lieutenant Governor-elect Mark Robinson, and he reiterated the fact that he wants to work with Governor Cooper, but that he will try to convince the governor to work with the Republican members of the Council of State, and that he's going to be vocal about it. And he's going to be talking about the use of the Emergency Powers Act and the governor as the sole person who's been making these decisions. So I think that there's going to be some very interesting, perhaps contentious meetings.
Well, I think before anything gets done there, the governor's going to have to be convinced it won't be just a partisan vote. And so far, there's no evidence to suggest that it would. Speaking of protest, about 200 protesters gathered in front of the governor's mansion last Saturday, the Saturday after Thanksgiving. We had Reopen North Carolina. We had NC Born. We had the Proud Boys. About 200 people gathered in a fairly confined space. Chris, they were yelling at each other. Somebody shouted out, "Hey, somebody's going to get killed here." The police got involved in this. Your reaction to this protest?
Well, we do have a First Amendment right to gather and assemble and protest, and we also have law enforcement authorities that are there and are there to make sure that that happens safely. I found a lot of the speech abhorrent, but I would defend the people of their right to protest and assemble, as is guaranteed all of us. I do think we have gotten to a place where the rhetoric is very inflammatory, and I'm worried about what happens. And some of these protests lead to threats of violence. Some lead to violence, and that's something we have to be vigilant about. But as abhorrent as some speech is, that's still free speech.
John, that just segues into the protest that took place in the town of Graham that started right before the elections took place. The Graham police and law enforcement tear gassed these people. There's been some arrest. There's now an NAACP lawyer involved in this. They say they're going to sue the police chief. They're going to sue the town for tear gassing an orderly protest. What's your take on all this?
I think that description of the event is not accurate, and I think that both sides are describing the event in ways that don't fully capture what was happening. It was very evident from the reporting on the ground by the local newspapers who actually know the people and talk to them, not the national media who did not understand the story, that the entire confrontation was planned ahead of time. That the protesters had gotten a permit, which allowed them to protest. Of course, as Chris says, they have every right to do so. The permit specified that they could not do certain things because it would be against the law, like block access, block the street that went to the polling place. They couldn't do that. They're not supposed to have gas-fired items that might be dangerous. The protesters went right out and did all those things. and that they knew that they were provoking law enforcement to respond. I don't think either side handled this skillfully and diplomatically, but the notion that there were some peaceful protests and these horrible sheriff's deputies gassed them, that is not a full description of the reality of the situation as it unfolded.
No question.
But it is also true that you tear gas with women and children there, which was
you cannot plan to break the law and provoke the police and then bring a few family members and assume that means that you get to break the law. That's the problem here.
Donna, you were going to comment on something.
What are law enforcement supposed to do? I have law enforcement in my family. They are really there, it's no cliche, to protect and to serve. If they are being advanced upon, and if people who have the permit know very specifically what is legal, what is not legal, what the expectations are, then how about for the rest of us deserve to be protected from people who are advancing a situation, trying to create strife? I just don't understand why we seem to be in a situation where so many people want to criticize the police who are trying to protect everyone else.
I think a case can be made on both sides of that issue. Let's move on. There's another protest taking place, Leo, and that's by a number of the Native American tribes, or First People, as they now like to be called, who are protesting the recognition of the Lumbee Indians down in the southeastern part of the state. The U.S. House passed a law. For years, we've been trying to see about officially recognizing the Lumbee. The U.S. House passed a law. President-elect Biden has, by the way, said that he would uphold that and encourage that. But these other tribes are protesting the recognition. It involves getting lots of federal funds, but isn't the real issue that they just don't want the Lumbee to have a gambling casino down in that part of the state?
Well, that probably has a lot to do with it. But once you get recognized as a Indian, whatever you call it, that gives them a lot of extra money that comes from the federal government.
And protection.
But the thing that you are looking at, and the thing that concerns some people, is the fact that the Lumbees are on 95 highway going from New York to Florida. And if you had a gambling casino in that area, it would do a tremendous amount of business. And I think that is a bother to a lot of people.
I don't think there's any question about it. Chris, political contributor Fred Eshelman, who founded a drug testing company, I think, is protesting the fact that he gave $2.5 million to an organization called True the Vote, which was supposed to help in advocating and protecting Donald Trump's election fraud cases. And he says the group didn't do what they promised him they were going to do, and he wants their money back. What's your take on this?
Well, I guess he probably should have looked into more maybe who he was giving the money to, because clearly the president's election, whatever you want to call it, is just off the rails. And, they're talking about now, the president has said the governor, the very conservative right-wing governor of Georgia, is somehow complicit. So I think probably Fred Eshelman should have looked a little harder before he contributed his money.
Donna, we've also got the East Carolina University women who are protesting the university's decision to eliminate women's swimming, women's diving, and women's tennis. They claim that the university has violated their Title IX rights. What's your take on this?
Well, the question at ECU, like a lot of people are facing, is money. So I would really love for reporters to ask the people who are complaining about the cuts, all right, here's the budget at ECU. How about you recommend what should be cut? There's some realities here with COVID-19. And so I think you just need to move on and accept that there are sometimes things are going to take place that you don't like, but I expect this is going to end up in the courts like virtually everything does these days.
John, we've talked about this issue for years, but a group of citizens in North Carolina are protesting and even threatening a lawsuit against the fisheries in our state. They saying that the Marine Fisheries Commission and the regulations are not fair, and there are too many nets with commercial fishermen. A federal lawsuit was dismissed on this. Now we've got the state lawsuit. Are they going to catch anything?
I don't know. This dispute between recreational and commercial fishermen, and this is not the only dispute that involves the fisheries, is long-standing. It is difficult to reconcile. Remember that we just amended our state constitution that gave people it recognized people's right to hunt and fish. But of course, that doesn't mean you can draw as much fish as you want to from a body of water you do not own. When you're talking about fisheries that are not owned by any particular person, then you do have to figure out how you're going to basically set and trade the right to fish a particular amount of fish out of a public waterway. It is not an easy issue. It is something the government does, in fact, have to be involved in because it's a common pool, not something that is privately owned.
Leo, we have to talk about this one. You were, I think, a county official before you got elected to the General Assembly, if I remember correctly. The town of Youngsville wants to hold a Christmas parade. Now, the Wake County Health Department has said, we don't think you ought to do that, getting this many people together in such a confined space. The mayor of Youngsville has come back and said, wait a minute. If you're going to let Walmart hold 200 people in their building, then there's nothing wrong with us being able to have a Christmas parade that's out of doors. People are going to be having some distances. They're going to be wearing masks. My question is Santa Claus going to show up in Youngsville?
You know, I think so. I think there's an irresistible force from almost everyone to have Christmas. I mean, people really want to go and do the things that they are very familiar with, like parades, having parties, and it's almost irresistible. But at the same time, I'm worried about this COVID-19 new wave that's coming out, and frankly, I don't think I would go to the
Christmas parade.
To the parade. I think perhaps we ought to step back and listen to Dr. Fauci and Dr. Mandy and say to them, you know, we really are fixing to have a problem.
And we're going to talk. I want to move into that. I remember very vividly, most of you have probably seen the Ira David Wood production of A Christmas Carol. And in there he says, we need a little Christmas this year. And I think a lot of people are feeling that way. DHHS Secretary Mandy Cohen held a press conference Thursday and declared our state had reached a devastating, that's her word, a devastating new milestone. Almost 6,000 new cases in a day, 2,100 in the hospital for COVID, and a positive test rate of 11.4%. She said in the past 11 months, North Carolina has had 3 times as many deaths from COVID as we had from the flu over the last 10 years. Leo, to go back to you on this, with the virus raging all over the state, there's still some who don't believe in the seriousness of this virus. They say statistically the number of people who get it are not significant, and even fewer die from it. Is that a sufficient reason not to fight it and wear masks?
I think you need to fight it and wear masks. I know one of the things that has always been a problem, at the very beginning, they said elderly people are the ones that are most likely that suffer the most from the pandemic. And I think elderly people are worried about that.
Yes, we do.
You are elderly, I'm elderly, I wear a mask. But what's the most interesting thing, the State Department of Health and Human Services says that it's going to be 5% more deaths this year than last year because of the virus. So yeah. I really think we should take it serious. I think Christmas is going to be a real problem.
It gets kind of unhandy in the bathtub, though. Donna, a national survey says that about 65% of the people in America are actually wearing masks. What's wrong with the other 35%? Do they just not care about other people?
No, I think that they may be wearing a mask in certain situations. They may be saying, I'm going to go outside, I am keeping my distance. You know, I find it fascinating that I have not run across anyone who doesn't think that this is serious, but I hear the narrative that there are people who are not taking it seriously. But people do have the right to make their own decisions, and if a store is going to open, it doesn't mean that everyone has to go into that store. So I think that you need to be balancing public health, This is a very serious issue, but you also have to balance that with economic health. People need to have the right to earn a living. We know that there are mental health issues going on here. So I don't think that there's anyone who's saying that this is not a serious situation. At least I don't know them.
Well, it's certainly they're acting that way.
Well, Tom, the good news, though, is, is the vaccines are on the way within
Yeah, but it's
weeks.
going to be March or April before they even get down to people like us. Donna was talking about stores. John, we had an interesting story. We're talking about protests. Had an interesting story in Wake County. In the town of Wendell, there's a general mercantile store there, and they put signs up on their plate glass windows saying, we don't want masks in this store. Don't wear a mask in this store, denying the evidence about the seriousness of this. The Wake County Sheriff's Department came in and cited them for not following the governor's mandate. Your reaction to this story? She got a lot of publicity about this, by the way.
She did. I think this was a very unwise decision on the part of the store owner, and it reinforces. I mean, look, there is a debate about how effective mask wearing is. Not whether it is effective, but whether it moderately or significant or hugely reduces the risk. Not that it's irrelevant, not that it's bad for you. So the notion that, the notion that a store would do this, even if there wasn't a law, and there is a law, strikes me as a bad idea. It doesn't help us reclaim our freedom to do, as Donna was saying, to do all the things that we want to do. Wearing a mask is actually helpful in regaining our freedom to do things.
Right, exactly. Chris, there's a huge soccer tournament that's going to be taking place in Raleigh this weekend. Thousands of young girls and women are going to be participating in this. Secretary Cohen has said she wishes they weren't doing it. This could become a super spreader event. Why didn't somebody stop it?
I don't know. It's that whole conflict. People have, are fed up. We've all been doing this since March. I understand all the frustration, but what seems different now, and what I wish people could get across is the end is in sight. We didn't know in June even when this end was coming. Now we know it's almost certain in the spring or early summer we can all get back to relatively normal times. I do disagree sharply with Donna that there are leaders. So the president has said all during the campaign the virus was turned the corner, was going away. The lieutenant governor said masks don't work. We have protesters who are saying we should never wear masks. We should go back to the way things were. We have politicians saying that, a lot of them. So what we need is a united front of everybody saying that and not being afraid that some people will be upset. This literally is life and death, and we only have a few months to go if we can just hold on.
Leo, back to you for a quick one. It might be a blue Christmas this year. A reporter at a press conference on Thursday asked Secretary Cohen, said, look, what we're doing obviously isn't working. Look at the spike in all the numbers and so forth. Why doesn't Governor Cooper impose some stricter mandates? My question is, if he tried to roll back some of the restrictions, do you think the people of North Carolina would follow him?
I think people are fatigued with the virus, and they're having a hard time going forward with all the requirements that the state has.
Yeah.
So I think at some point in time, if it gets worse,
all right,
we start losing to death, we'll have to do something.
All right, Donna, let's get to tell us something we don't know. We'll let you go first.
Okay. Well, at a forum this week at the John Locke Foundation that I moderated, one of the guests was the incoming Labor Commissioner, Josh Dobson, and he reiterated his support for workplace freedom. He talked about the right to work, a law in North Carolina. He talked about our ban on collective bargaining for public sector unions, and that's going to be important next year because unions are targeting North Carolina, and the Labor Commissioner could have a lot to say about that, talking about freedom.
Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
Well, I'll give you an update. We talked about COVID. North Carolina's death rate is significantly lower than Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina. Yeah. What do those states have in common? They didn't put as many restrictions in as North Carolina did. You want to judge Governor Cooper's performance, look at how many less people died in North Carolina than states that did less.
John, I got about a minute left. Tell us something we don't know.
Still on COVID, some researchers at NC State University have looked at immunity support, trying to reduce the infectiousness of the virus. They recommend green tea, dark chocolate, and muscadine grapes.
Tea and crumpets, Leo, sounds great. Tell us something we don't know.
You know, I read the paper every day, and it's getting thinner and thinner to where there's almost very few pages left in the paper. And I've noticed, particularly in the News Observer, that they are sort of asking for donations from people so they can have really good people working there. And that's very unusual to me that they would accept donations.
You know, I'm having a hard time getting Friday night's scores on Sunday, and particularly watching the obituaries on the sports page. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And while there, subscribe to our newsletter and our podcast. Until next week, when we have more balanced debate for the Old North State, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Farmville, steeped in Eastern Carolina tradition, yet surprisingly sophisticated. In Farmville, find a French bakery, a furniture school, glass blowing, great shops, and restaurants. East of I-95, in the middle of everything, find it first in Farmville.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
The big issue in 2020 is healthcare. Let's talk basics. You are the key to your own personal health, but there is strong evidence that if you have a relationship with a family physician, your quality of life will be better. You'll likely live longer, and you'll have 33% lower healthcare costs. Your family doctor knows you, has your medical history, and can quickly diagnose health problems. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.